A wealthy billionaire believed for years that his young son was completely blind, trusting every word his glamorous fiancée told him about the boy's condition. She always insisted that the child suffered from a serious problem that could never improve, and she controlled every detail of his supposed treatments. The billionaire, overwhelmed by responsibility and grief from the past, accepted her explanations without questioning anything. He thought she was helping him take care of the boy and guiding him through a difficult situation he did not fully understand. But everything began to change when the family's longtime maid quietly noticed small details that did not fit the story everyone believed. She observed the child's reactions, the behavior of the fiancé, and the strange routine built around the illness. Day after day, the maid grew more certain that something was wrong. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. After the death of his wife during childbirth, Richard Hale tried to rebuild the life that had collapsed in a single night. Every morning he woke up feeling the same weight in his chest, but he pushed himself to focus on his newborn son, Ethan. Richard did not know how to balance grief and responsibility, so he followed a simple routine to avoid feeling lost. He cared for Ethan as best as he could, but the house felt empty without his wife. To cope, he spent more hours at work. In these early months, Richard's only goal was to keep moving forward, even if he felt like he was walking through fog. As time passed, Richard began attending more social events, hoping they would distract him from the constant sadness he carried. During one of these events, he met Victoria Barnes, a woman who stood out because of her calm presence and confident behavior. She noticed his struggle even before he tried to hide it. Victoria approached him with gentle curiosity and a willingness to listen. Their first conversations were simple, but they helped him feel understood. Victoria did not pressure him to act strong or pretend he was fine. Instead, she let him speak at his own pace. Richard began to look forward to their interactions because he needed someone who accepted his vulnerability without judgment. As they continued to meet, Richard allowed Victoria to step closer into his personal life. She visited him more often, sometimes just to check on Ethan or to bring small comforts that made daily life easier. Over time, he started depending on her guidance, trusting her judgment when he felt unsure. Victoria never pushed her way in. She always waited for him to open the door, and he did, again and again. Though he still carried the pain of losing his wife, he found moments of stability when Victoria was around. While Richard navigated his changing feelings, Ethan continued to grow quietly. He was a calm child who rarely cried, but there was something different about him that Richard could not fully understand. Ethan often struggled to focus his eyes on objects or people. Sometimes he would reach towards something and miss by several inches. These small signs worried Richard, but he did not know what they meant. Whenever Richard mentioned these concerns, Victoria always responded with confidence. She told him not to worry, to trust the process, and to keep observing Ethan. As Victoria became more involved, her guidance shifted from simple suggestions to a more active role in the household. Richard, exhausted from balancing work, grief, and fatherhood, accepted her help easily. She organized routines, planned daily tasks, and offered opinions about Ethan's care. Whenever Richard hesitated, she stepped in with certainty, making choices that he followed without question. Her confidence made him feel safe, as if someone finally understood the family he was trying to rebuild. When Ethan turned 3 years old, life inside the house began to change again. Around this time, Margaret Cooper returned to work for the family. She had been the trusted employee who worked closely with Richard's late wife, and her presence brought a sense of familiarity back into the home. Margaret quietly resumed her usual responsibilities. She watched Ethan carefully, trying to understand how he was developing. She also paid close attention to the new environment created by Victoria, who now had a strong influence in the household. As Margaret settled back into her position, she began to notice things about Victoria that made her uneasy. Victoria acted confident and kept control over many parts of the household, but she behaved differently whenever Margaret was nearby. Margaret sensed that Victoria did not fully welcome her return. Despite this, Margaret focused on Ethan, who needed constant care and patience. The boy struggled to respond to visual cues, and Margaret observed how he often missed objects placed right in front of him. His eyes seemed sensitive, sometimes watering for reasons she could not understand. One particular concern Margaret could not ignore involved the eye drops Victoria regularly applied to Ethan. She often saw Victoria using them without any clear explanation or instruction from a doctor. Each time the drops were used, Ethan reacted with discomfort. His eyes would redden and he sometimes rubbed them as if they burned. Margaret tried to stay calm when she noticed these reactions, but inside she felt alarmed. She tried to watch discreetly, hoping to understand why Ethan was reacting so strongly. Victoria began taking full control of everything related to Ethan's supposed treatments. She organized the schedules, ordered the products, and managed every step without asking for help. She presented Richard with several imported eye drops, private appointments, and new medical expenses that grew larger each month. Richard accepted everything without questioning her. Whenever she explained that Ethan had a chance to recover part of his vision if they followed the process exactly as she described, Richard listened with hope. Meanwhile, Ethan struggled more after each application of the drops. His reactions became stronger, and he often turned his face away from any light. His sensitivity grew so much that he sometimes refused to open his eyes. Richard noticed these changes, but believed they were part of the treatment. Victoria always reinforced that discomfort was expected and that progress required patience. Margaret began noticing important differences in Ethan's behavior on days when the eye drops were not used. On those days, he seemed calmer and more comfortable. He rubbed his eyes less often and did not show the same level of irritation. This pattern slowly became clear to her as she compared his reactions from one day to the next. The more she observed, the more convinced she became that something was wrong. One quiet afternoon, Margaret discovered something that concerned her deeply. She found one of the small bottles Victoria had discarded. It was left near a trash bin, slightly hidden under other items. Margaret picked it up and looked at it closely. The label was unclear, and many details were either missing or unreadable. What she saw did not match the descriptions Victoria had given Richard. This discovery made Margaret feel uneasy, but it also confirmed the suspicion that had been growing in her mind. Unsure of how to handle the situation alone, Margaret decided to speak to Richard. She chose her words carefully when she approached him, explaining what she had noticed about Ethan's reactions and the strange bottle she had found. Margaret did not accuse Victoria directly. She only shared the facts as she had observed them. However, Richard reacted in a way she did not expect. He became distant and cold, as if her concerns were an attack rather than an attempt to protect Ethan. He dismissed Margaret's observations as misunderstandings and told her that unfounded criticism would not be tolerated. Feeling misunderstood and unsupported, Margaret grew more determined to find out the truth. She began writing down everything she saw. She created a small notebook where she recorded times, behaviors, reactions, and anything unusual that happened around Ethan's treatments. She did all of this quietly, making sure Victoria never noticed. Margaret became even more determined to understand what was happening inside the house. She took photographs of the bottles Victoria used, making sure to capture every angle of the labels and the strange markings. She also kept the empty packaging Victoria discarded. In addition, she wrote down the dates of purchases and deliveries that Victoria handled. Every new detail strengthened her concern. During one of her quiet searches, Margaret made a discovery that shocked her. While Victoria was distracted, she checked the woman's bag, looking only for clues related to Ethan's treatment. Inside, she found documents that raised new alarms. There were repeated receipts, as if the same expenses were being used more than once. She also found medical prescriptions that looked suspicious. The signatures did not match, and some papers seemed to have been copied or altered. Feeling that she could not stay silent anymore, Margaret tried confronting Victoria in a subtle way. Instead of answering calmly, Victoria reacted with hostility. Her tone became sharp, and her expression filled with anger. She accused Margaret of invading her privacy and overstepping boundaries. Victoria made it clear that questioning her actions was unacceptable. She even hinted that Margaret could lose her job if she continued interfering. Not long after the confrontation, Victoria spoke to Richard and told him her version of what had happened. She described Margaret's actions as disrespectful and disloyal. When Richard heard this, he called Margaret and reprimanded her. His tone was stern, and he expressed disappointment in her behavior. Margaret tried to explain, but her words seemed to make no difference. Despite the threats and the reprimand, Margaret remained firm in her mission. Determined to obtain proof that could not be ignored, she took some of the eye drop samples she had secretly saved and brought them to a small clinic in the city. She explained only what was necessary, asking for a chemical analysis of the substance. Her hope was that the results would reveal whether the drops were safe or harmful. Margaret finally received the results from the clinic, and what she read left her deeply disturbed. The analysis showed that the eye drops contained irritating substances with no therapeutic benefit. Instead of helping Ethan, the product could worsen any existing eye condition. The report explained that the ingredients caused inflammation and sensitivity, which matched the reactions Margaret had been observing for months. With the analysis results in hand, Margaret decided to study Ethan's past medical records. She searched through old documents stored in the house, hoping to find answers about his real condition. After some time, she discovered detailed reports written shortly after his birth. These records explained that Ethan was born with a rare visual impairment. The condition affected his ability to focus and respond normally to visual stimuli, but it was not described as completely irreversible. The documents outlined possible treatment options and indicated that early and appropriate care could help improve his vision over time. Determined to find someone who would take the situation seriously, Margaret reached out to the family's former pediatrician. She knew this doctor had cared for Ethan in his early days. When Margaret explained what she had discovered and shared the analysis results, the pediatrician reacted with clear concern. She reviewed the old medical records alongside the new information and confirmed that the substances in the eye drops were incompatible with Ethan's condition. Even though Margaret now carried undeniable proof, she faced resistance from almost everyone around her. Richard, still influenced by Victoria, insisted that the treatments were guided by professionals. Other people connected to the household viewed her as someone trying to create conflict. This left her feeling isolated, but she refused to let the pressure stop her. Victoria soon realized that Margaret was not just suspicious, but actively watching every detail of Ethan's treatment. She began controlling access to Ethan in a strict and obvious way. Margaret was no longer allowed to stay alone with the boy. At the same time, Victoria increased the frequency of the eye drop applications. She claimed Ethan needed more consistent treatment. Richard reacted to all of this by siding completely with Victoria. He believed her behavior demonstrated strong commitment and responsibility toward Ethan's well-being. Margaret felt her connection to Richard slipping away entirely. The atmosphere in the house became heavier when Victoria took the conflict to the next level. She accused Margaret of being negligent with Ethan, claiming that the boy's condition worsened after spending time under Margaret's care. Margaret reached a turning point when she managed to recover a video from the internal cameras of the house. After hours of searching, she finally found a file that had not been deleted or altered. In the video, Victoria was applying the eye drops to Ethan while he cried uncontrollably. Even though he could not see well, he moved his head away repeatedly, trying to escape. His cries were not simple complaints. They showed clear pain and fear. After recovering the video, Margaret gathered all the other documents she had collected over time. She reviewed the medical reports, the analysis confirming harmful substances in the eye drops, the suspicious receipts, and the falsified prescriptions. She combined these materials with the video, arranging everything into a complete and organized dossier. With the dossier ready, Margaret waited for the right moment to talk to Richard. She chose a morning when the house was quiet, and Victoria was not nearby. Margaret walked to his office with the documents held firmly in her hands. When she entered, Richard looked at her with caution. Margaret gently placed the folder on his desk and asked him to listen before reacting. She explained that what she had to show him was important and that it involved Ethan's health and safety. At the beginning, Richard struggled to believe what he was seeing. The video shocked him the most. Watching Ethan cry and twist in pain while Victoria forced the drops into his eyes made him feel physically sick. As he moved through the receipts and bank transfers, his disbelief shifted into confusion. The amounts were extremely high, much more than he remembered approving. Margaret showed him how payments had been repeated, redirected, or disguised as medical expenses. Margaret continued explaining each part of the dossier with patience. She reminded Richard of the old medical records showing Ethan's real diagnosis and the treatments recommended by specialists. She compared those records with the harmful substances found in the eye drops Victoria insisted on using. When Margaret showed him the analysis proving that the drops had no therapeutic effect and could worsen Ethan's condition, Richard felt overwhelmed. As Richard examined the final pages of the dossier, the reality of the situation became impossible to deny. He saw the transfers to Victoria's accounts, the repeated invoices with no medical justification, and the proofs of falsified prescriptions. Each new discovery hit him harder than the last. He realized he had allowed Victoria to gain complete control over his decisions by using his fear and hope as tools. Richard, now fully aware of the truth, decided that he could not wait another minute. He asked Victoria to meet him in the main room of the house. When she arrived, she immediately noticed his serious expression. Richard placed the folder Margaret had prepared on the table between them. He told her that he had reviewed everything and understood what had been happening for years. He spoke with a steady voice, explaining that the evidence showed a clear pattern of manipulation, financial fraud, and harm toward Ethan. Realizing she was cornered, Victoria began to shift her strategy. She tried to defend herself by saying she only wanted to help the family. She argued that Margaret had always been jealous and was trying to destroy their relationship out of spite. Her words became more desperate as she spoke, but Richard remained firm. He had heard enough lies and excuses. Richard began presenting each piece of evidence in order so she could not deny or twist anything. He showed her the financial transactions that went directly to accounts connected to her. He showed her the falsified prescriptions and the inconsistent receipts. Then he played the video in which she applied the eye drops to Ethan while he cried in pain. Victoria tried to look away, but Richard forced her to face the screen. Without raising his voice or hesitating, Richard took out his phone and called the authorities. He explained the situation clearly, stating the evidence of fraud, child abuse, and falsification of medical documents. Victoria's expression changed instantly when she heard him making the call. She stepped toward him, begging him to stop, but he ignored her. When he ended the call, he told her that the police were on their way. Within minutes, the authorities arrived at the house. Richard led them into the room and handed over the evidence. When the officers approached Victoria, she tried to resist, shouting that the accusations were false. The officers remained calm, explaining the charges to her: fraud, child abuse, and falsification of medical records. Victoria continued shouting, but the officers restrained her and began escorting her out of the house. As she was led through the hallway, she turned her anger toward Margaret, shouting insults and blaming her for everything. Margaret stayed where she was, silent and composed. After Victoria was taken away, the house became quiet again, but the silence felt different. It was not filled with fear or tension anymore. Richard stood still for a long moment, processing everything that had happened. Eventually, he turned to Margaret with a mixture of guilt and gratitude. For the first time in a long while, he saw her clearly as the person who had stayed loyal, patient, and brave through every challenge. Richard thanked her, realizing how much she had risked and how alone she had been while fighting for the truth. After Victoria's arrest, the house entered a period of emotional recovery. The atmosphere slowly shifted from tension and fear to something calmer and safer. Richard knew that the first step toward rebuilding their lives was making sure Ethan finally received the proper care he had been denied for so long. He contacted reliable doctors and specialists who thoroughly examined the boy's condition. These professionals confirmed the earlier findings Margaret had uncovered. Under proper care, Ethan began to show signs of relief. The irritation in his eyes decreased, and he no longer cried in pain. One of the most important moments during this recovery period was when Richard approached Margaret to apologize. He spoke honestly, admitting that he had failed to listen to her when she tried to warn him. Margaret accepted his apology with calm understanding. When Richard asked her to stay permanently in the household, not just as an employee, but as a key part of Ethan's life, she felt both honored and relieved. As time passed, a deeper bond formed between Richard and Margaret. It developed naturally through shared responsibility and trust. They supported each other during difficult moments and celebrated small victories in Ethan's progress. Their connection became one of the most stable parts of the household. Ethan, now protected and receiving proper care, found stability in this new environment. He responded positively to the consistent affection and gentle guidance he received from both Richard and Margaret. With Victoria gone, the emotional balance of the home shifted completely. The absence of manipulation, tension, and fear brought a sense of peace that everyone in the house felt. Richard and Margaret rebuilt the daily routines with care, focusing on creating an atmosphere filled with affection and stability. Each day marked a small step toward emotional healing. Together, they formed a strong support system. The pain of the past did not disappear overnight, but the family slowly learned to replace old fears with trust, warmth, and hope. For the first time in a long while, the Hale household felt like a true home. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.